Fear is a Weapon by Dear Weasel 86. This incident occurred about 6 years ago when I was about 21. Since I was a young kid, I always had a great interest in herpetology. This is the study of reptiles and amphibians. I love going out to search for those types of critters. Herping, as it's called, is my favourite hobby. I live in southern Louisiana and it's a great place for herping and a really good place to find my favourite animals, snakes. On the day of this incident, I was preparing to search for snakes on a road that ran through a swamp near a lake close to where I lived. If I'd driven slowly down the road, I could catch snakes that were crossing it. So it was late in the afternoon and I had to stop at a gas station to fill up my truck before heading out to the herping spot. This particular gas station had a reputation for violent robberies as well as other unsavoury activities, but they had the cheapest gas at the same time, so I had to go there. So I was pumping my gas just daydreaming when an old late model sedan that looked like it had seen better days pulled up beside me. In the car were 4 thuggish looking men staring at me. The driver was a very big individual who was in his late 20s or early 30s, and he regarded me out of the window. I instantly got very nervous as I had no idea what they wanted. After a few seconds, the driver said, "Hey, boy, I got that dopamine." I realised that they were then talking about selling me drugs. I replied, "Oh, nah man." The driver then called out of the window to me again, "Come on little boy, I got that dopamine." And again, I told him no. The driver then tried several more times to push his dope on me, every time calling me some variant of little boy. I am a very small young man with a slight build, and even to this day I could still pass as a teenager, and while I am fine with this, I don't like being constantly reminded of it. I certainly don't like somebody using my small stature to intimidate me into doing something I don't want to. I finally got fed up and yelled at the driver, "No, I don't want any morphine. Go away, leave me alone." This caught the attention of several other drivers at the same time. This caused that weird guy to leave quickly, squealing his tyres as he did so. I then paid for my gas and headed out to the road through the swamp. Now the road gets little traffic as there is a major interstate next to it. Mostly the traffic just consists of people fishing or launching boats, so it's a great place for herping. I then stopped my truck at the place where I wanted to begin my search and began going through several pillowcases that held the snakes I had found from the previous trip that I needed to let go. Most of the pillowcases just had a harmless water snake in them, as well as a scrap of paper with the mile of the road that I found them in. That way I knew where they needed to be released to again. I was making a list of these for efficiency's sake, so that way I could quickly release each one and get on with my search. So I was checking the case that had at least a 4-foot long rat snake in it, when suddenly the same model sedan pulled up behind my truck. All 4 of the occupants piled out and began walking towards me. The driver must have weighed a solid 260 pounds. He was coming straight at me while the others were fanning out around me. The driver then started yelling, "What's up boy, you don't want my stuff? We're gonna show you what's up now." I was scared to death and had to work very hard to keep my knees up from buckling under me. I then realised that I still had my tyre iron in my truck, but I noticed that I wouldn't be able to dig it out in time before they would have got to me. I also had the fear that my strength would have been drained from the fear, so I couldn't have used it effectively anyway. So I did the only thing I think I could have done in that situation. I reached into that pillowcase and pulled out the rat snake. The snake instantly drew itself into a coil and began to hiss and gape at them. The 4 thugs were now only a few feet away. Realising what was in my hand, they immediately stopped their advance. The driver then began to back up the moment he caught the attention of the snake, It then lunged out into his direction. At this time, all four of them began screaming and cursing loudly and pulled back into their car. They then took off so quickly that they hit the median and nearly tore out a tyre of the old car. I stood there for a few more minutes just shaking. The intimidating but harmless rat snake then began to squirm around, latching itself onto my hand. I knew it was time for me to come out of my fear-induced coma. I then quickly had to drive to the release points of all of the snakes and let them go, thanking the rat snake as it slithered into the vegetation. I then immediately went home without doing any more herping. This happened to my cousin, by Lover O'Bowl. I'm very close to my cousin, and she comes to visit me and my grandma sometimes, and we then just sit around and talk about what's been going on. This one story scared the life out of me, however. At the time, she was working at a retirement community that often involved her staying late night in order to help out the residents bathe and whatnot. On this particular night, she decided to go and get gas and some snacks, and she had a pretty uneventful ride through lots of abandoned streets that were surrounded by farms and land that was for sale. While she was driving, she noticed that a truck turned and began driving behind her as she turned. She thought nothing of it and continued on her way to the gas station. She then noticed that the truck tailgated her on the empty road. She sped up and the truck did also. She did, however, feel a sigh of relief as she turned into the gas station parking lot. Unfortunately, he did too. She pulled up to a pump and watched. He didn't. He pulled up right behind her, boxing her in though with the car park in front of her. He wasn't near any pumps. She said she knew for sure something was up at that point. She then got out and practically sprinted into the gas station. She then grabbed a soda and started pretending to be indecisive about the chips. She then snuck a glance outside and noticed that the man had got out of his truck. He was now coming into the store as well. He then approached her and said, "Hey, there's something wrong with your car." Although she was driving a 2008 car, she knew very well that there was nothing wrong with it. She decided to prod him to see if he was tricking her. "What's wrong?" What? Something's wrong here. If you come outside, I'll show you. I'll even fix it for you. I got the tools in my truck." She then felt progressively more uncomfortable. She then nodded, trying to act like she wasn't panicking while looking at the cashier who wasn't paying attention. "Oh, you mean the gas cap? Yeah, that's been bothering me." She made up something on her feet. He then smiled and nodded excitedly. "Oh yeah, the gas cap. I have the tools for that. I can fix it for you right now. I'll help you out." Her heart was racing. "Okay, you go get what you need. I'll meet you right out there when I'm done, okay?" He then nodded and smiled again as he went back outside and began shuffling around in the passenger side of his truck. She then went up to the gas station attendant and said, "I need to call the police." Her phone was dead, so she took the gas station phone and started calling the police immediately. She then detailed everything and watched as the man looked back at her. She said he went pale in the face and suddenly got back into his truck and hauled out of there. She was terrified that he would be waiting for her up ahead of the road, so they sent a police officer to escort her home. To this day, she can no longer go to the gas station without anticipating that she'll see him in his truck. She's recently moved back to Vegas, but it still haunts her. Do you know where Newton is? By Bunny Kitty. A few weeks ago, right after the tragic massacre in Newton, CT, my boyfriend, and I went to see a late showing of The Hobbit in a city nearby. I should clarify that we live in Lower New York. We're literally on the border of Connecticut, extremely close to nearby Newton. The show started at around midnight, and the movie is about 3 hours or so long. The ride home from the theatre is about an hour drive on the highway. Needless to say, we were in for a long night, so we left the theatre at around 3. I barely made it through the movie without falling asleep. I then took the opportunity to curl up in the passenger side seat of the car for the ride home and catch a nap. After about half an hour of driving, I'm now aware that the car has been pulled over and we're stopping. And I look out for just a second and I see that my boyfriend has stopped for gas at a rest stop. We're the only people at this rest area. I feel okay closing my eyes and continuing my nap. I then listen to my boyfriend pumping the gas. I then drift off into sleep for a minute or two while he goes off inside. I then hear the bell at the gas station door open. I figured that it was just my boyfriend since he had probably paid for the gas and was coming back to the car for me. I then opened my eyes to see an older man in a beat up workman style jumpsuit with a jacket and some lunatic smile coming across his face approaching from the parking lot. He's snapping his fingers, walking directly towards our car. I panic for a second before I see my boyfriend leaving the gas station building, also heading towards a car. The man then smiles at me when he sees me laying in the passenger seat and I bolt upright. I'm just lucky that my boyfriend is a very non-sensual guy. He just glares coldly at the man and then pushes his way past him to get to the driver's door. Hey. The creeper is still smiling like he just won the lottery. You know where Newton is? He's talking really weirdly at this point. I'm really unnerved because that day our community lost a lot of people, children and neighbours. Nobody had been smiling all day after the news of the 27 murders, especially not when talking about them. This guy is showing every last one of his teeth and he looks like he's about to burst out with happiness. I have no idea what the man wants with this information or why he's looking for Newton at 3:30 in the morning the day after the massacre. We have Connecticut plates on our car, but being as how we live on the border of the state, it's not too uncommon for people to ask us. My boyfriend continues to stare at this guy and just says no. As he gets in the car, he then closes the door. The man is now standing so close to the vehicle that my boyfriend bumps him with the door when he opens it. My boyfriend locks the doors and doesn't make eye contact with the man at all and just starts the car. Even when the man starts knocking on the window and smiling at him, he then firms it again. You look like you know where Newton is. Come on, you know where it is. He's pounding on the window while my boyfriend is driving away. The man is still standing on the closed side of the window. I'm so worried that we're gonna run over his feet. While we then pull out onto the highway, I look into the rearview mirror and see that the man is still standing in the edge of the parking lot under the gas station lights. He's just facing our car, watching us, smiling and waving ear to ear. Smiling Man in a California Ghost Town Deserted Gas Station by Mangus Gallant. Okay. A couple of years ago, one of my closest friends decided to relocate across the country with his long-term girlfriend to work at a job that he just couldn't refuse. The only issue is that he didn't want to fly his dogs over with him when they moved out since they'd be staying in a hotel for the first month. He was also a bit reluctant to fly them out over health concerns for the dogs. By the time he located at a home to rent, he was missing his furry buddies and he made a request for his sister, another close friend and I to drive them to him in LA. Now we're Chicago folks, so the trip would be a long one. However, with 3 of us to foot the nearly 30-hour drive, it would be a piece of cake. We left early and drove long hours. Along the way, It was decided between my friend and I that we'd fought the majority of the drive ourselves, and if we needed to, we'd let our friend sister do some driving. We were on a bit of a time crunch due to a snafu with the rental agreement, so we didn't have the luxury to stop very often past an 8-hour stay in Devon. As for the journey itself, it was relatively smooth, apart from getting pulled over right before entering Utah for driving 2 miles in the left-hand lane of an empty highway. Anyway, from that point on we made it through Utah, Arizona, and Nevada without getting into too much trouble as we entered California in the need of gas. I had been driving for the majority of the first day and tagged my buddy in after being pulled over. I then remained in the shotgun seat acting as navigator, searching through the GPS for a fuel stop. We kept our eyes peeled for road signs and we eventually discovered one. It was pointing to a ghost town. It didn't make sense how it would come up this conveniently, but it did. It was just what we needed, located almost directly off the interstate. So we then rolled in, running off little more than just fumes as we approached the stop. Normally we let the dogs out at every rest stop, but having stopped for not long before and both the dogs sleeping snugly, I decided it was best just to keep them in. I decided to pump the gas without anyone else leaving the vehicle. My buddy pulls up on the opposite side of a beaten up green sedan with a short gentleman just turning into the approach to the shop. I notice that there are a few other hoopties at the pumps, all unoccupied, and there are a couple of other cars parked up near the station, most likely belonging to the employees. So nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That was until I swiped my card. The pump rejected my first swipe attempt. I chalked it up to being a misreading, so I then swiped again and the pump reads out, "Please see attendant." I was annoyed. We needed gas. I tapped on the window and told my buddy what I was gonna do. I asked him if he needed anything. I then take their orders of what they wanted. I then start walking up towards the store. I did, however, make a mental note of just how strange this gas station was. It was kind of quiet, especially for one of those right off the interstate, but it almost seemed too quiet. As I walked in though, I felt more weirdness. The first thing I noticed was that there are some boxes of chips just left on the floor, like somebody was stocking shelves but just gave up. I then veered to my right. I noticed that immediately there was no one milling about in this place at all. Considering there were 6 cars besides my one out there, I felt like I would see at least somebody. Things got even weirder though when I realised that there was nobody behind the counter. No customers, no workers. It then dawned on me. What had happened to the gentleman who was at the pump adjacent to mine? Surely they can't all be in the bathroom. This is when I got this sensation that something was just not right. I have always been a person who almost felt like I could trust my instincts, and these instincts were screaming to me just to get out of there. I wanted to run, but I held back. I wouldn't want to look suspicious by booking it out of the gas station that was empty, so I decided just to play it cool. The best thing I could do at this point was just act natural, like nothing was wrong. I was probably inside of this gas station for only a couple of minutes when I started to leave, but I stopped just before exiting to listen for something. Anything. A flushing toilet would have been a good sound, believe it or not, but I heard nothing. As I then look up towards my car, I get this immediate sense of dread. It's like that moment in a movie where the hero is about to meet his end. You know, just before anything happens and there's that awful silence. Yeah, so I'm about 25 feet away from my car when I suddenly see this gentleman come out from around the side of the shop opposite to me. This is not the same man who I saw pumping gas. He was larger and he had a particular look on his face. I continued walking towards my car, but when I turned back to look at him, He's now walking towards me with purpose. At this point, I note my way back to my car with an increased urgency not to stop. And of course, when I get back to my car, my friend has locked it like a complete clown. There is also the 95-pound golden retriever sitting in my seat. Apparently, my travel companions did not notice how freaked out I was, or the fact that a really weird guy was still walking in my direction. I punched on the window and told them to unlock the door immediately, to which he only half rolls down the window to tell me that the dog was in my seat and they were afraid she'd jump out of the window if they opened the door. I'm literally shaking at this moment. I don't know how close that guy is, or how many of them are actually there, or what they're plotting. I reach in and throw the dog back as far as I can. My friend is now realizing just how freaked out I am. He started the car and quickly drove off. Just as we're pulling out, I took one last look back. I can see the guy has stopped about a pump away from me, and he's still looking at me with that weird look on his face. We then found another gas station further down the road. This time there was a ton of people in it. I then shared my experience and why I was so scared and desperate to get back into the car. We then turned back into the interstate, which meant we had to pass that same station again. It had been about 15 minutes since we had initially went there. We were all more curious than ever to see what was actually going on this time. As we looked, we all went silent. Every car was still sitting in the exact same spot it had been previously. Not one of them had moved an inch. Although thoroughly freaked out, we could not stop looking behind us just to make sure we weren't being followed. None of us could believe what we'd just seen. After a while, I then received a phone call from my credit card company saying about $100 exchange at a mobile station. In the end, we all made it safely to LA, but I want to know what the hell was really going on in that gas station. My Experience at the Gas Station by Amy Alk. About 10 years ago, I worked for a short time at a small gas station close by my house. Both of my kids had started school, and we always needed extra money. I was about 26 or 7, and I had never really worked anywhere before. We stayed a little busy throughout the day, as there were 3 factories very close by. We would get a lot of traffic from the employees there. We would usually get most of our customers flying through during the shift change times. So anyway, one weekday, mid-morning, I was working by myself, which was usual, but my manager, who usually works days with me, was out sick. No big deal. There was nothing that I couldn't handle. There were people in and out all morning. Nothing was out of the ordinary. That was until the transfer truck pulls in. It parks at the side of the building. Now, we didn't carry diesel fuel, but it wasn't unusual to have big trucks pull in for drinks and bathroom use or whatever. So the driver walks in. He's some tall, unattractive guy. He's a little creepy looking. He had a huge refillable coffee mug. He then asked me if I could get some fresh coffee or could refill his mug. I told him no problem. He then fills his mug and comes up to pay. He then begins to chat with me. He told me that he had a delivery for one of the factories up the street. He then asked me what was the best way to get there. I just told him, no big deal, happens all the time. He then starts telling me that he's from Arkansas, and that after he dropped off his load, he was going to head back home for a few days. I just nodded my head politely. He then asked me if there was a restroom. I told him that, yeah, there is, and I pointed him over there, but I didn't come out from behind the counter. He then starts chatting to me again, without even going to the restroom though. He then asked me if I was working alone, and that's when all kind of strange signals started going off in my head. I told him my co-worker had to run an errand and would be right back. He winds up staying in there for about 20 minutes trying to do small talk. He asked me about another 6 or 7 times where the restroom is. During this time, customers were coming in and out, and when somebody would come in, he would walk around the store, kind of behind the shelves. It was obvious he was trying not to be seen. At this point, I'm trying my very best to stay calm and figure out what I needed to do to get out of there. I look out at the gas pumps. I see that there's a man from one of the factories up the street on a forklift filling it up with gas. When he comes in, I was trying to start a conversation to the best of my ability, asking him stupid questions to get him to look at me. I could then gesture where the creepy guy was standing behind the potato chips. Unfortunately, he wasn't getting the hint from me. He was just about to walk out of the door when he suddenly turned back to me. I mouthed to him, "Help me." He then turns around sharply and comes back in, and by this time, the creepy guy had come out from behind the potato chips. Forklift guy asked me if I'm okay, and I tell him no. He asked if I need help, and I said yes I do. All of this was being said very low so that way the creepy guy couldn't hear. All of a sudden the forklift guy sprints behind the chips, then slams into the creepy guy and pushes him into the coke cooler. He tells him that he has to leave right now. The creepy guy then sprints straight out to his truck, jumps in and gets out of there as quickly as he can. I then wait with the forklift guy while I call the police. When they eventually get there, I made a report and given them the best description that I could. I then called a co-worker and asked them to stay with me. Eventually the forklift guy and the police left me. About an hour later, one of the cops comes in and tells me that they've caught the guy speeding on the highway leading out of town. Not only that, he had half of a load. He had obviously not dropped off his load or went in the direction he previously told me. There was no way he had time to get to the factory to unload it. Also, they found a pistol in his truck that had been stolen in Alabama. He had also just been released from prison for some crimes that make me shake when I think about them and what he could have potentially done to me. I'm just forever thankful and grateful that the goodness of the forklift guy managed to cancel out the potential evil of the truck guy. God knows what would have happened to me otherwise. From the grocery store to the gas station to my complex, by Indy Clear. My husband works opposite shifts than me, so we always end up doing our errands separately. My errand that afternoon was to pick up the groceries. It was unseasonably warm outside, so I was just wearing flip-flops and a tank top. Whilst at the grocery store, I kept on seeing a man walking the same aisle as me, literally aisle after aisle. I mean, this isn't too uncommon. I didn't take notice of the fact that he only had one item in his cart the whole time though, or the fact that he was standing behind me at the checkout lane. I went to the next gas station to fill up, and I then heard a truck idling in the row of pumps next to me. I then noticed that it was the same guy from the grocery store. I didn't think anything was wrong, as many people used to go to the grocery store then quickly go to the gas station due to the discounts you could get. I finished up pumping and drove home to my apartment complex about a mile away. As I was getting the groceries out of the truck, I felt a presence near me, and then I saw that again it was the same man. Now I was able to get a better look at him, and I could even see his truck in the parking lot. He then walked up towards me. I asked him if he needed anything. He then nodded his head and said, "Josh, I saw you at the store and I knew I had to follow you home. I had to know where you lived. I just wanted to touch you." Now of course, at this moment I was right outside of my apartment and knew going to it would be a massive mistake. It was while looking at my apartment that I realised my neighbour's car was there. I then slipped my phone from my purse to my hand and told the man, "You're being very inappropriate and you need to leave me alone." He then shook his head and said, "I don't think you understand that I need to do this." He then leant in towards me and grabbed me. I instantly dropped my groceries on the ground and started to run away. I didn't even bother looking behind me. I just flipped out my phone and quickly called my neighbour. He then instructed me to meet him under a tree somewhere. I didn't even bother looking back because I knew this guy was probably after me. So I ran behind the tree and hid, waiting for him, and then I saw the same guy drive by slowly in a blue pickup truck. Unfortunately, I was too shaken to look at the license plate. When my neighbour got to me, he walked me back to my car and we saw that all of my groceries were also gone. I coasted at a gas station, but I pooped my panties. It was around 11 at night. I had just finished working out at the gym. I went to the grocery store to pick up some food for the next couple of days. While at the grocery store, I decided to get $120 cash back. This was money that I owed my mother. Unknown to me at the time, this was money that I would come so close to losing. Instead of going straight home, I decided to go for a little drive. I just got my car not too long ago, and the novelty of driving stick hadn't worn off just yet. After about an hour and a half of driving around the city, I decided it's about time to head home. While driving, I then passed a gas station that's kind of close to where I live. I decide that now's a good time as any to pull into a gas station to fuel up. I pull in, and I'm the only one at the gas station. I'm in an industrial/business part of town, so there isn't really much around. That's when I notice that there's a lot besides the gas station. There's no lights in it besides the light illuminating from the gas station itself. I then notice that there's an SUV sitting there. It's about 100 or 200 meters away. I don't think too much of it. I get out and start pumping gas. I then notice that there's a woman around the corner who begins walking straight towards me. As soon as I notice her, a shiver ran down my spine. I then instinctively lock my car doors. She continues to walk towards me with her hands in her pockets. She's staring straight at me the whole time. I got into a fight with my boyfriend. He left me there. Can you give me a ride to my mum's house? She said casually in her raspy smoker's voice. Another chill then ran down my spine as she repeated the question, word for word almost, in that same raspy voice. I have to pump gas first, I said to her, keeping my eyes on her the entire time. She then walked around to the passenger side door and grabs onto the handle. Can you unlock it, please? I'm cold. I've been here a while. I have to pay for gas, I said, deciding to cut the gas pumping short. I then walked inside and talked to the guy behind the counter. I told him that the girl outside was kinda suspicious and I didn't know her. He just kind of shrugged it off and told me that I wasn't interesting enough for his time and I just walked out. I guess that she must have been high or something. I wasn't too sure. As I walked out, the SUV that I'd mentioned earlier started up. I watched the driver maneuver himself so that way he could just drive out of the exit. He stopped with the engine still running, and he was about 100 meters away at this point. Can you open the door now? I'm really cold. So many alarm bells went off in my head already. First, she looked kind of sketchy. She was dressed well enough, but her face was just pretty rough. She was covered in makeup, but it didn't hide how nasty she was looking. Her sunken eyes were dull, bloodshot, and just dead looking. Second, she didn't seem like a damsel in distress at all. She didn't seem upset and she spoke without much emotion. "No, that's not my problem, I need to get home," I said to her as firmly as I could. "Come on, you're driving me home, right?" I can't, I have to get home right now," reaching for my phone. "I'm cold, I've been out here for hours," she then shouts at me, pretty angrily for somebody who's asking for a favour, I thought. I then noticed her look at the SUV. I started cluing into what was going on and I raised my voice a little bit. "That's not my problem." I'm now at the driver's door. "I'm freezing. You said you'd drive me home." "No," I said, starting to raise my voice. She then started raising hers. We weren't yelling, but it was getting a little heated. We went back and forth like that for a couple of minutes. My mind was racing. I thought about losing my car, about getting stabbed or shot, about getting robbed for the $120 I had in my wallet. I just lost it on her. "Get back right now, I swear to God you have no idea who I am. Get back." I guess I was in fight or flight mode at this point. "You better get out of here right now then," she said, walking backwards. I instantly felt terrible. I had this horrible shaky feeling. I instantly went out of fight mode and instantly went into flight mode. I watched her until she got a decent distance away from me, noticing she was walking towards the SUV. I couldn't wait much longer. I hopped in my car and peeled out of there. I then turned into the next station that I could. I needed to make sure that I wasn't being followed. I called the cops and they said that they'd send a car over there, but there wasn't much they could do as no actual crime was committed. But I did the right thing and she was most likely bait for some kind of robbery or kidnapping. I drove home as quickly as I could and tried to forget about it all. Guy at the Gas Station by Crayola Cola. So my boyfriend and I were following an all-nighter. Being the computer addicts we are, at about 7 in the morning, we decided to run to the gas station just outside of our neighbourhood for some energy drinks. We pull up and park on the side of the building, away from the other usual creeps who go there. I then watch as my boyfriend goes in and grabs the drinks. As he enters, I see a man at the corner of the store. He's leant up against a wall drinking something from a paper bag. He eyes up my boyfriend as he enters, then his attention flicks to me. I got an instant uneasy feeling but managed to remain calm. I know that my boyfriend shouldn't be more than a few minutes. Sitting here alone, I watch as he edges closer and closer to the car. I started to get really scared and started shaking a bit. The guy then comes super close, but I suddenly feel a rush of relief when my boyfriend returns. I can't help but notice that guy is still watching us. As soon as my boyfriend returns, I can see that the guy turns a corner towards him and starts following him. I freeze up. I have no idea what this guy is about to do. My boyfriend then walks faster. The guy keeps pace. And right as he reaches the car door, the guy starts making a fast grabbing motion towards his throat. I throw open my car door and start blaring the car horn. The guy scrolls up at me and backs up against the wall. My boyfriend jumps in the car and we speed off. I can still see him as we drive away. Weirdo at the Gas Station by 50 Shades of Tea. It sounds like my version. These are getting really good. So a little context to my story. I go to a private Catholic university in downtown of one of the most dangerous cities in America. Next to my dorm, there is a little gas station that sells snacks and stuff. I go there pretty often because they sell Ben & Jerry's ice cream and everybody needs that in their lives. So at the time of my story, it was about 1 PM and I was heading to my next class. I thought I would stop there and pick up a snack before class. I was waiting in line holding my yogurt and all of a sudden this huge guy comes out. He was probably 6'5" and 250 pounds. He taps me gently on the shoulder and tells me that my hair is really beautiful. I'm somewhat used to this encounter because I have really long natural strawberry blonde hair. I smiled warmly and turned back around. Nothing about this guy scared me initially. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I feel a huge hand slide up the back of my neck and grab my hair. The guy groaned and yanked it back. I by no means was able to defend myself against this monster of a man. I'm only 5'2" and about 140 pounds. I screamed and whipped out my pepper spray that was on my keychain. Luckily the guy behind the counter dove over the desk and slammed him off of me. I was still in a weird state of shock. The guy who pulled him off of me was super kind and then made sure that I was okay when I left outside. I haven't seen that guy since, but just the power of that guy alone scares me. The Mask by Every Drop. This encounter happened to me a while ago. I couldn't share it for a long time. For some background, I live in the country in Ohio, down a long drive with fields on both sides that lead into the woods at the back. I'm about a mile away from town, so if ever I need the police I have to call the sheriff. I live with my husband and our boxer dog. So my story begins when my husband was getting some overtime at his factory job. It was a Saturday and he was working his third shift. I had spent the evening at my parents' house and didn't want to head home until around midnight. I stopped in town at a 24-hour gas station to get some drinks and chocolate and some beef jerky for my dog. As I go to exit the gas station, I get the overwhelming sense that something is just wrong. I then look around to see if anybody is watching me. Then, over to my left, about 20 foot away, is a girl in this really cute little dress with a white horse mask on. She's just standing there. We stared at each other for a good few more minutes. I was terrified. I then jumped into my car when I was able to move again, and I pulled out onto the road as quickly as I possibly could. I didn't look back. Now, that was unnerving, but I was home just a few minutes later giving my dog the jerky and eating the chocolate while watching TV. I had almost forgotten about it, thinking maybe it was just a teenager playing pranks on me. All of a sudden, my dog takes off down the hall to the back porch, barking and growling and attacking the window. I run over there afraid a window is about to be broken into, and I then stop dead in my tracks. Once again, I'm face to face with a horse mask. Again, we just stare at each other. I looked over at the back door. Was it locked? Oh god, I can't remember. The horse mask then looks over at the door, slowly walking over to it. I do the same. We both reach for the door at the same time. It was locked. The horse mask then looks behind her, and for the first time I look around at my backyard. There is a guy in a horse mask too. I'm like, okay, this is enough. I'm gonna call the cops. I then go and grab my dog and shut the porch door. I go into the living room and go to grab my cell phone. Of course, I left it in my car. It's in my car. It's in my garage. My dark garage. Basically, now lacking any other choice, I had to open the door to the garage and try to open my car door. But guess what? I must have locked it and I didn't see my keys anywhere. I then crept back into the house. There's no sign of my dog now, but there's no sign of the horse masks anymore. I then crept to my back window to see if I could see anybody, but I couldn't see anything. I grabbed my keys and grabbed my phone. I then called the sheriff and told him what was happening. I explained that I was followed home and was alone. They asked me if they were still outside. I looked out at the window and I couldn't see anything. That was until I got to my front yard. Right out there they were, just standing about 100 feet away holding hands, staring. Honestly, I was crying at this point to the dispatcher, who I assumed would have known more about the situation than I would, but from the sounds of it, they didn't really know what to do. As I just stood there, clearly on the phone, the girl waved at me. Then, they walked hand in hand down my lane out of sight. It took the sheriff 10 minutes to get there. They found nothing, so that was the last I ever saw of the two people in horse masks. Night at the Gas Station by Sinister Shadows. During my segment 1 driving classes, my friend and I teamed together with a certain instructor. We would find ourselves mostly listening to his stories of youth rather than the concepts of his driving. So one day he told us a story about when he used to work the night shift at a gas station. This event occurred in the days when people were hired to pump gas for customers. So one night a van pulls up to the station. The driver is slumped over with his head almost resting on the steering wheel. My instructor starts to get nervous but shakes it off. While pumping the gas, he notices that the van's sliding door is slightly ajar. The door then slams open and a man, holding a butcher knife that clearly has blood on it, lunges out after him. My instructor then begins running across the lot. He's being chased the whole time by this guy. There's a chain link fence at the edge of the station. He eventually manages to climb over it, not looking back, running into the fields to the side. My instructor then decides to look back to make sure that he's not still being followed. He looked and he could see that halfway over the fence, the guy had just hopped down and was about to run to his van. He then proceeds to sprint to the van and immediately they pull away. My instructor then calls the police. Apparently that man was wanted for a series of serious crimes. He was later found that night and arrested. I hate to think what he was going to do. By Deep Space Heater 317. So my husband and I were driving home after I picked him up from work at around 6 o'clock. The sky was getting dark already. He was very tired from work, so he just reclined his chair back and took a nap. I stopped over for gas and quietly got out of the car as to not wake him. Right as I started to shut the door, a hand grabbed it and a voice then demanded that I got back in the car. Of course. I screamed and my husband woke up quickly and jumped out. I turned around to see a very weird looking man. He had very old clothing and he had loads of meth scars on his face. He quickly backed up and threw his hands in the air. I wasn't gonna do nothing. I wasn't gonna do nothing to her, he said to my husband as he knelt to the ground to show how harmless he was. I was shaken and I told my husband just to get back in the car. The man then took his opportunity and bolted out of the gas station into the woods. We sat there for a minute, then went inside and called the police with the cashier inside. He obviously thought I was alone because my husband's seat was so low and he was out of sight. I find little comfort in the fact that he could have potentially kidnapped me. We would have been 15 miles away from the nearest person outside of the gas station worker. Come with me and we'll get some gas for your car by Jesper, Zero Steelers. This happened about 15 years ago. It was dusk, and I was driving alone in a two-way road in rural PA when my car suddenly runs out of gas. I'd been about 5 minutes into my 20-minute drive home when my low fuel light came on. I figured I could make it to the next gas station in the next town. I was wrong. It was, and still is, the first time that I've ever run out of gas. I was familiar with the area because I drove this road all the time to get back and forth between my apartment and my parents' house. This was back in '99. I had a cell phone, but it was very basic. It was very low on battery and I only had 1 bar of service at the time. I was standing beside my car, holding the phone up trying to get a better signal to call my parents, when suddenly a car pulled up behind me and a middle-aged guy jumped out. He seemed nice enough, but of course I was wary. I was a 19-year-old college student who was female. I was alone. He proceeds to tell me about how he has a full gas tank and he can easily come and get me over to his house, which was just up the road. "Get in my car. I'll take you there. I'll bring you right back," he said to me. I politely declined, and I asked if that he could simply bring me the gas while I waited. This is when he got agitated. "I'm a deacon at my church. I have 3 grandchildren. My wife is at her house right now. Just come with me." Obviously, I said no. I think I even said something like, "Sir, if your wife or daughters were in my situation, would you want them to go into a stranger's car? Sorry, but there's no way I'm coming with you." He was obviously annoyed, but he said, "Fine," and told me that he'd be back in 10 minutes. As soon as he drove away, I tried calling my dad again. When my call finally connected, my dad left his house immediately. It took him about 20 minutes to show up, during which I stayed in my car with the doors locked. The guy supposedly also only lived up the road. I never saw him again for the entire duration of my wait for my dad. Creepy guy asking for gas. By inconceivable. So this happened quite a few years ago when I was maybe 14 years old. To set the scene a little, my dad was out of town at my grandparents' house and it was me, my mum, my little sister and little brother at home. We lived in an old house in a fairly quiet neighbourhood. It was quiet and around midnight and we were all going to bed after watching movies. I then went to walk upstairs to my room to get in bed and I suddenly heard a knock at the door. I go back downstairs thinking it was my neighbours needing something because, again, we lived in a quiet neighbourhood and it was midnight, so I just go downstairs. I then see my mum talking through the door because she didn't want to open it. She motions for me and my siblings to get away from the door, so we all step back and listen. This was a guy asking for gas. My mum told him that we didn't have any gas and sent him across the street to our neighbours. She did this because our neighbour is a big scary guy who owns a whole lot of guns. At this point, I should mention that we lived maybe a minute drive from a gas station, so not very far at all. Anyway, my mum sent us all to bed and that was it. Years later, I reminded her of this, and her face immediately got pale. Pretty strange reaction because I had never seen her react like that before, and I didn't think of it as a bad situation at the time. She then told me that she heard someone's vehicle outside her house. She went to the window and saw the guy turning his truck into our drive and another one hop our chain link fence. We assumed that he didn't think we had dogs or didn't want to alert them. She also said that he tried to open the door. She was holding the door shut and talking to him through it. She said he kept trying to turn the doorknob and push the door open. I couldn't see this because she made us get away from the door. When she sent him next door, she watched him cut through the neighbour's yard and get into his truck and drive off, never even asking them for gas. She told me that was the reason she sat in bed with a gun all night in case he ever come back. Now, the next part is the reason she went pale and freaked out. All of this happened on a Saturday. The following Monday, she gets to work and checks the jail logs. She sees that this guy got arrested for attempted murder, attempted kidnapping, and other things. I get chills whenever I think about this night. The Lone Gas Station by Sumif. I live about 20 miles away from the city in which I work. I live out in the country. About a short walking distance from my house is a highway, and on the corner is a 24/7 gas station. So last week, I went right by there during midnight to grab some juice and peanuts. I then see one car parked on the side. This is normal. It's usually just a guy working, and rarely are any customers at this time. Do you ever get that feeling of dread coming over you, like something is wrong? Well, just as I walk in, I don't see anybody. Nobody behind the counter or even in the store at all for that matter. So I assume that they're maybe just in the bathroom or stepped out to the back for something. I then suddenly heard the chime on the door when I came in. I'm feeling weird and uncomfortable, so I wait a minute even though it felt like forever. I don't see anyone, so I eventually decided to call out, "Anybody here?" I didn't get a reply to that, so I simply waited a minute, put my peanuts down, took one last look around and walked out the door. I then checked the car park to make sure that there wasn't anything troubling anyone. I even glanced down the side of the store to make sure nobody was there. I'm pretty uncomfortable at this point, so I just decided to call the police. They then show up 10 to 15 minutes later. To be honest, it really did feel like an hour. They then went to search the place. They then find the cashier dead in the men's bathroom, beaten to death. They then called for backup and asked me to recite what happened when I went inside. This isn't even the messed up part. So I then get back home and my dog is just on the front yard staring at me. He's an inside dog, so it didn't make sense why he was here. I then realised that the front door is cracked open. My heart is racing, so I then grab my dog and head back to the gas station and let the police know. They send one of the guys to search my home. Nothing is stolen or out of place, but there was signs of forced entry. So this was last week, and about 5 hours ago, I get a call from my brother who works at the county sheriff's office. Supposedly, they pulled up the camera footage about 10 minutes before I walked into the store, and somebody come in. They started punching the cashier and then dragged him into the bathroom. On the footage, you can see me walk in and look around and call out, and then you can see me walk out and check out the car, then walk into my vehicle to make the call. About this time I'm in the vehicle. The alleged murderer walks out of the bathroom, sneaks out of the back door, and before leaving the view of the camera, he takes off in the general direction of my house. Fortunately, My wife was out with some friends watching Beauty and the Beast again, but I'm convinced that I missed a murderer at the gas station who then broke into my house. This week I had new security cameras installed alongside a new front door, but I'm pretty sure whoever did this is still out there, and I'm sure that none of this will stop him.